Well, thank you very much. And now you know everything you needed to know on the making of this conference. And I have the great pleasure to welcome my distinguished colleagues for this first plenary, and I'm honored to be with you and to welcome them. It's really a privilege for me. As Marie-Caroline said, we crafted the theme and the rationale behind this conference together within the scientific committee, the organization committee, and you've read it because you applied for the conference, so I'm not going to reiterate what we wrote down. What I would like to do before I introduce my colleagues is just to raise a few questions that kind of stem from this rationale, stem from the theme of the conference, the way we described it in the booklet and online. So I'll just raise a number of questions and not lecture or give answers. The first set of questions that emerge from the theme of decentering migration studies in particular, and maybe social sciences in general, is a question of where is the center? If we want to decenter, maybe we need to acknowledge that there is a center, and maybe we need to locate, especially when it comes to migration theories or social science theories, where do theory come from? In terms of empirics, in terms of houses of power, academic knowledge production, and also how these theories or how this knowledge is produced, the kind of methodologies, epistemologies, and the power relations between these epistemologies and methodologies. And related to that point, there is a set of questions that also connects migration studies or migration research as a field or and disciplines, and the way our profession as scientists is structured through disciplines, and in a very Foucauldian sense, also in a way of disciplining our behaviors, our way of thinking, and our way of disseminating knowledge. And of course, there is a kind of maneuvering, a possible maneuvering between the field and the disciplines, and the way things are structured also vary across countries, and that's very much questions that we can raise today, productively, hopefully. And of course, from this stems a third type of questions, if you will, is what kind of barriers or obstacle do disciplines or field create? And what kind of possibilities or structure of opportunities do they create? So are they obstacles, hurdles, generative? And these are questions that, of course, as professionals of a profession, we can ask ourselves every day, but maybe that's also a question that we can put on the table when talking about decentering. So decentering is spatial, it's disciplinary, it's institutional, and this leads me to my fourth realm of question, which is from these interrogations, critiques, acknowledgement, how do we move forward? And to try and provide either more questions or some answers, I'm really happy to welcome my colleagues. So I'm going to introduce my colleagues one by one before giving the floor to all of them. So I will start with Magdalena. So Magdalena Lesińska is assistant professor at the Center of Migration Research, University of Warsaw, and chairwoman of the Committee of Migration Research of the Polish Academy of Science. And Magdalena, you're working in political science, so that's probably where you speak from. And you examine mostly migration and diaspora issues and policies, and particularly working on diasporas in Central Eastern Europe and state diaspora relations. And then Peggy, ladies first, and alphabetical order as well. So Peggy Levitt is Mildred Lane Kemper Chair of Sociology at Wellesley College in the US and co-founder of the Global Decenter, and you speak from the field of sociology mostly, and your current work on migration, your work on migration has investigated and still investigates how migrants and family access transnational social protection across borders, and looking at the institutions embedded in these processes of safeguarding rights and fulfilling a citizenship obligation. And you also work on global cultural and intellectual inequality, and you've written extensively on global contemporary art and literary worlds. Darshan Vigneswaran is Associate Professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Amsterdam. And you speak from the field of political science, international relations, and political geography. You have worked, and you still worked on the territorial foundations of international politics and the transformation induced by human mobilities in relation to state institutions and state processes. And you have worked on European contexts, but also on African context, and emerging debates on extraterrestrial governance, which not everyone can say they've worked on extraterrestrial governance. And so basically your work is at the intersection of territory, sovereignty, bordering practices, public space in relation to migration. Biao Xiang is director of the Department of Anthropology of Economic Experimentation at the Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology in Halle, in Germany. And you speak from the field of social anthropology, and your research examine migration mobility across various contexts, including Asian contexts, notably in relation to state-society relations, basically. And you've worked on labor, social reproduction, and governance, and you analyzed migration regimes and how they emerge and operate, in the midst of broader process of political, economic transformation and institutional dynamics. And I am extremely, extremely happy to give you the floor. And I will start in the order of the program by giving this mic works, if you want, by giving the mic to Peggy. Peggy.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. It's a pleasure and honor to be here today, and it's really nice to see many old friends and meet new ones. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Global Decenter. Some of you were already at a panel and you learned a little bit about the Global Decenter. I'm going to try to flesh that out. There are many members here in the audience, and I hope some of them might be listening online. So I'm hoping that they will also join me during the question and answer period and kind of help me fill in the blanks of what I've left out. I decided to summarize our manifesto, which is a work in progress that was collectively written, because I think it's the best way to make clear in the short time that I have our vision for putting decentering into practice. So when you asked your questions, I guess my presentation is about how to move forward. So while many members of while many members of the GDC work on migration, we also have working groups in arts and culture and epistemology and pedagogy, and we're open to other topics. So while we're offering these ideas today as a way to think about migration studies, we think that they apply to many aspects of cultural and intellectual production. Let me begin by saying a little bit about who we are. The Global Decenter is an international network of academics from a wide range of disciplines, culture makers, including artists and writers, culture managers, such as editors, curators, museum professionals, and also people who use culture in their activism, who are committed to producing, disseminating, teaching about, and acting upon knowledge in more inclusive ways. Now, we are by no means the first to take up these issues, but how we aim to try to move them forward is by striving to be truly international. So that's not just North America and Europe, but underrepresented parts of the world that are not as well integrated into the global cultural and academic world systems, and also the provinces of those countries. We try to be truly interdisciplinary, to not just stop at critique, but to always chart a positive way forward, and to do this with generosity, humility, and collaboration, rather than the ego, individualism, and competition that often characterize academic and cultural worlds. And we've done this so far with very little funding. So that's not to say we would not like to have a major grant, but it is to say that it's possible and even liberating to do lots of things a la guerrillera. So without having to conform to a funder's vision and goals and time frame and outcomes. We envision a far-reaching approach which doesn't stop at decentering ideas and content and the categories that we use, but also involves decentering ourselves as individuals, the institutions where we work, and the infrastructures through which ideas and knowledges travel. It requires creating South-South, South-North, and East-West networks and other cross-cutting connections and pathways that open up opportunities for more cultural and intellectual production to be shared in more places on a more equitable basis that doesn't depend upon European or North American permission and facilitation. So how do we actually put decentering into practice? The first step is working towards decentering ourselves. And this has a lot in common with the reflexivity activities that have been talked about earlier today. To shift our epistemological and ethical stance, we need to move out of our comfort zones or the center that we're currently working from. This is an intellectual, value-based practice. Just as a meditator has to return over and over to the breath to refocus her attention, so too we have to bring a similar kind of attention to decentering our relationships, whether it's about research, writing, or teaching. That means constantly checking in with ourselves about the assumptions and judgments we knowingly or unknowingly bring to the table. It means being able to being aware of how our default categories and status shape how we show up in positive and negative ways, and thinking purposely about what our appropriate role should be. Only when we do that can we enter into a relationship with beginner's mind, listening and looking with fresh and hopefully more constructive eyes and ears. Wherever we gather, those in the room should feel respected, welcomed, and empowered to speak, no matter where they're from and what their professional status is. We're all teachers and learners. This work is never done. We keep learning, we keep unlearning, trying, failing, starting again, and eventually get better at waking up when we're asleep at the metaphorical wheel. Truly decentering ideas requires a similar kind of mindfulness. Many efforts to create knowledge in a more inclusive way stop at incorporating more materials created by a wider range of actors, and all too often the same historical and contemporary figures do that diversification work in the exhibit or on the syllabus. Once they're added, the box is checked. Latin America and Africa are now covered. Decentering demands that we ask a prior set of questions about how that expanded roster of creators and creations came to be so well known to begin with. Often these individuals become the go-to people because of the social networks they built by studying, working, and consulting abroad. We need to understand how this restricted set of social networks and institutions gain such predominance, in what ways they now reify rather than disrupt the inequality pipeline, and where points of change are possible. We need to purposely include scholarship and scholars from countries and social categories that are not well represented, garner the resources allowing us to do so, and identify and cultivate new individual and institutional collaborations with partners in these underrepresented regions. We also need to create the conditions which will allow these newcomers to fully participate by providing adequate resources and financial support. Another aspect of decentering ideas is not to assume that the history and scholarship which has already been written does the trick. What the West knows about many parts of the world is terribly uneven and incomplete. Large swaths of the world have been left out, and partial perspectives and preconceived ideas have created distortions and omissions in knowledge production. We must identify and fill these scholarly gaps. The next step is decentering institutions. This is particularly challenging because, as you know, by their very nature, institutions resist change. In addition to featuring more diverse curricula, exhibiting a broader set of objects, or acquiring a wider range of materials for the archive, those doing the teaching, curating, and collecting have to come from a more diverse set of experiences and to be trained in a broader set of tools. Those who run the institutions have to as well. Now, funding here is a major source of a major piece of this, and we all know that that picture is increasingly bleak. In addition to cutting research budgets and denying scholars and students visas, it's even more difficult for artists and writers and thinkers from underrepresented countries and those who manage their work to get a start. But this is also about who decides what questions are worthy of researching to begin with, and the methods and theories that are considered valid in this research. Funders and philanthropists often support work on the causes they care about, which isn't always the same as what local researchers and activists would prioritize. One important catalyst of decentering institutions is to decenter the infrastructures which connect them. By that we mean fostering horizontal networks between like-minded institutions in the global South and between the global North and South. These pathways and ties disrupt traditional networks of power by circumventing them. Institutions gain some degree of autonomy and strength in numbers, moving forward on the path to creating their own centers or nodes of activity, energy, and resources which reorganize the playing field. Their aim is not to recenter, and this is really important, their aim is not to recenter a more pluralistic hierarchy in a new way, but to create a flatter landscape characterized by a more equitable distribution of power and resources. In fact, decentering needs to acknowledge the possibility of and the right of refusal. By the right of refusal, we mean recognizing that not all knowledge systems or their producers wish to be included into an interconnected world system. Not everyone wants to be recognized or be the subject of knowledge produced by and circulated within that system. For far-reaching institutional decentering to occur, this values-based soul-searching needs to dig deep, to not take for granted that Western centrism, individualism, capitalism, patriarchy, and heteronormativity will always rule the day. Even in the most discouraging times, like those we're living through now, we commit ourselves to always look for windows through which to decenter, sometimes silently and invisibly, and sometimes by screaming. Rather than expecting that what we will create will last forever, or the same way of doing things will always work, we understand that transformational reform requires a collection of strategies enacted simultaneously in and from different localities and at different rates and rhythms. We also know that we need to be wary of predators, that when decentering gets going, those in the center are always lurking nearby, likely to adopt many of these innovations in order to recapture their preeminent place. We can't then think about the practical aspects of decentering, especially decentering infrastructures and institutions, without thinking about politics. By politics, we mean both politics and political stances. The infrastructures of word choices, for instance, is more than a matter of poetics, technology, or even wealth. It's deeply political, you all know this, with political origins and, more importantly, political consequences. Words can exclude and even dehumanize people. Calling them terrorists, viruses, or worse opens the door to violence and even crimes against humanity. But words can also include people, foster empathy, and instill respect by calling them brother, sister, or saying, I value your point of view.
Maybe that will be easier for the people online to see. Yeah, I probably thank you very much for this opportunity, I think it's really an opportunity for debate and for thinking together. So therefore, if I may, I try to introduce a slightly different line of thinking about the decentering. And this line is a legacy of Antonio Gramsci, and which has been more explicitly developed by Stuart Hall. The line is that the most effective way to decenter is to create a new center. The most effective way to bring something down is to create the alternative. And Stuart Hall, of course, influenced migration studies so deeply because he was one of the first theorists who articulate the idea about the diversity of identities, you know, what are the roots and origin, the culture, and etc. What Stuart Hall said is very different from what we read after 1990s, I must say. Same language, but completely different effect. Stuart Hall says identity is fluid, is diverse, therefore you can create your own universe. Therefore, you can curate your life and you find space within the power structure. And there will be a different way of talking about diversity, which is to deconstruct everything. Whichever category is there, we can break it down. I mean, of course, I'm exaggerating a bit, but this I see, we are now doing self-critiquing work, and I see it is a major challenge we face today, which is thinking, academic thinking is losing organizing capacity. We just heard from this wonderful organization team from both IMISCO as well as the local French team, the practical organizing labor put in to make this event possible. But what is missing, I must say, is a thought, ideas that we produce, whether they help people to see their life in a more coherent manner, help them to clarify all the multiple contradictions in a way that they feel intellectually secure at the least, and they feel that they can take action. Take action here and now. Act on the condition that is so unforgiving. So this is organizing capacity of research. I think it's probably the priority point we should pursue. And just very quickly now it came to my mind, you know, Edward Said, Orientalism is also a Bible for migration studies today. But Orientalism, I don't know why that is the case. Huh? When I read it, I thought, oh my God, why it is so different from what I was told about Orientalism. I mean, Said said explicitly in his introduction, now I can't remember the page. Basically, he said the purpose of writing Orientalism is not to say all the Western Europeans are wrong. That is a minor point. Of course, they are wrong. But the main point is that he said, I remember that because it stuck in my mind. He said, I want to show to the third world intellectuals how power and knowledge are related to each other. How knowledge production is a matter of social organization. And that is why it is so powerful. So now I think we think of the decentering or recentering. For me, there is a critical line here. Is not only the West and the rest. I mean, that is a problem there. But I think there's another line is between two fields. One is a field of migration studies, represented by us here, academic field. And the other one is a battlefield that the migrants are engaged in across the world. Again, I'm probably exaggerating, but I'm saying this with a spirit of self-critiquing. I think the gap between these two fields are become wider and wider. Even though we are very willing to represent the migrants, the field of academic research become vulnerable, small, become less resourced, and professionalized. We are pressured to publish writing. How many of these writings are read, appreciated by migrants? How many articles are forwarded by one migrant to another? Wake up the friends to say, you have to read this before tomorrow morning. Why cannot, no matter how vulnerable we are, we have one most resourceful basis at our hand, which is the migrant community. If social science lose people, if migration studies lose migrants, that is demise. And then the field of academic studies become more and more vulnerable, partly because of the professionalization. Of course, it's not our choice. That is something we should think of as Hélène also mentioned. There's a practical question to be considered. And at the same time, the battlefield that the migrants are engaging in, as we all know, across the world, it is become more and more fierce. So whether a line can be drawn between these two fields, for me, it is the most important way to reconfigure our knowledge production and also reconfigure our existence. I don't know, do we have 2 more minutes, or I should stop here? Okay, good. Then I just give one small personal example. I may struggle to give a flavor to just show that I have no solution about how to draw these two fields. I mean, one thing that makes me very proud of my own work, one moment was that one anthropologist from Netherlands working on international migration from China, and the other one, anthropologists from South Korea working on internal migration in China. And they both told me that when they interviewed migrants, internal and international, when they interviewed them, the migrants cited my work on the notion of suspension, which they did not know. Then, of course, I look at the social media and in Chinese, it is widely cited and discussed. But I have no idea how many times it was cited. In academic literature, probably I would be lucky if it's more than 10. Then suspension basically means it's attitude towards life, to say, disregard here and now. Don't face a problem now. You should always work hard, single-mindedly, to move forward. Yeah? It is, and then constantly in chase, like the hummingbird, you flip your wings fanatically in order to stay in air. And the migrant told me, this intern migrant told me that I have to sell my life now, meaning that working very hard, disregarding health consequences, sell my life now in order to buy life in the future. In order to have money, then I can go to see doctor, etc. So this is also particular perception of the relation between you and your body, between you and the current moment, and you and the future. So the suspension is a condition that you always feel very busy, every moment occupied, but overall life is quite scarily, frighteningly empty. So this type of consciousness is what I try to capture by the notion. And why do migrants cite it? It's not because it simply describes their condition, they feel, I mean, it is part of it. They say, oh, they give a name to what they feel, and etc. But I can recognize migrants cite it because, not only because it describes the situation, but it because resonate with their own desire to problematize their own life. they feel there's something wrong in their life. It's not only caused by structure or institution exploitation. It is something that is partially self-inflicted. So there is a moral confusion, moral injury in their life. They want to have a clear understanding of that. And for me, that is a true social and political agency. Is that people want to problematize their life in a way they can make a change, rather than just say everything is unfair and exploitation, etc. They want problematize in this way, so therefore they can take action. And this language, suspension, became meaningful because it facilitated such problematization. But once it removed from that context, once it traveled into academic hall, workshop, it becomes very difficult because I feel it's quite painful. People ask, what's the definition of suspension? I mean, it's so vague, right? And how is that related to liminality? All these social theories of time, future, aspiration, etc. How are you going to accommodate that? And I did spend lots of time looking at all the literature about time, and etc. And then I discovered it's very little to do with time. You can write in that way. I mean, you can write a lot about this perception of temporal order and whatever. But the key here is that migrants' desire to problematize their own life. They want to exercise that type of moral agency themselves. And this is very difficult to capture in academic language. And of course, I'm a bit lucky, and I insisted to carry on. I mean, I can imagine a PhD student, a fresh postdocs. I mean, they will intuitively capture that migrant desire, write about it, but when they go to the defense ceremony or go to workshops, they will feel, oh my God, it's, I was too naive, I'm not professionalized enough, I have to change myself and link with all the literature and etc. I mean, that is happen all the time. Huge waste, huge waste. So I don't know what's the solution. I just show this my struggle. So I think probably part of this, and this is probably Professor Peggy mentioned, and it's probably have something to do with deinstitutionalization of research. Make this research, make our intellectual labor more organic, try to capture that kind of dynamics of life, rather than just trying to coming up with neat and clear patterns and shapes in order to just to put material in certain clear order. Yeah. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
So I have some slides. You can help me with that. There we go. Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Hello, everyone. So this year's theme of decentering migration studies really speaks to me. I've been arguing for a long time for moving knowledge out of traditional centers and towards alternate locations. And over the last couple of decades, we've seen a lot of progress. Researchers in Europe are recognizing the colonial foundations of their knowledge. Scholars from places like Johannesburg, Sao Paulo, Yangon, Mumbai are taking center stage in migration studies debates. We could even imagine a future, say in 10 years or so, where we gather in a conference hall like this, and I'll be able to look out and see a radically different set of faces that's more representative of the world's population. Maybe we wouldn't even be meeting in Europe at all, but in one of those cities that I just mentioned. But when Hélène called me to speak on this stage about this issue, I found myself second-guessing, asking, is this the sort of future of a decentered migration studies, of a global migration studies, one that we actually want? Would the global expansion of this discipline really represent an advancement of knowledge? What would emerging scholars learn from this process? And more practically, is this the direction their careers should take? Now, don't get me wrong here. I don't have any problem with the decentering part of the equation. My concern in this paper is more with the migration studies side of the problem. In this piece, I argue that migration studies is an irreparably flawed institutional project. And the only thing that researchers interested in the study of human mobility, settlement, power, and racism can do to save that project is to leave. That would mean leaving institutions like AMISCO, leaving conferences like this one, searching for an alternate intellectual homes, and building different types of intellectual agenda. Now, those are some bold suggestions. So let me lay out the bones of the argument in this paper. First, we've been studying migration in earnest for over 70 years, and is there that much left to say? This is a success story, okay? All the work being done by people in this room has amounted to so much. We have a very good understanding of the key dynamics of migration, its cultures, power relations, and so much more. But nobody's listening to us. Migration studies began with the goal of ensuring that practitioners would be able to utilize research to contribute to the development of fact-based and theoretically informed policies. And on this ambition, let's just say that not everything turned out exactly as planned. The policymakers who I've been studying seem far more enamored with efforts by tech companies to use remote sensing technology to predict migration patterns as if it were akin to predicting the weather. None of their models incorporate any of the understanding we've built up over many decades. In democratic countries where there's hardly any public debate on migration, at least not in the Habermasian sense, where the force of the better argument can win. In this context, we have to ask ourselves, what purpose does our research serve? We can continue speaking truth to power, but friends, power hung up on us long ago. Second, and here's a slightly more difficult point, migration studies is a statist discipline. Now, this point requires some development, so let me slow down a little bit here. Migration studies is not a field of research, and Hélène, I can already feel you getting ready to dispute this, but let me clarify. Disciplinarity is not about bricks and mortar. It's not about having chairs or departments or BA programs. It's a question of the way power shapes the work that we do. And if we look around us today and think about all of the people who've crafted their papers to speak to this audience or fit within this community's norms of good scholarship or speak to the conference theme, it's a lot of work. And that's a lot of power. And the most powerful part of our discipline is its ontology, its understanding of its objective analysis. Political scientists have the state, geography has space, our discipline has the migrant. And this is an objective analysis that we have received directly from the state. And as a ream of scholarship and research has told us over the years, the figure of the migrant is a deeply racialized, othered, and dehumanized figure. Now, many of my colleagues in the audience today have organized this problem. They have given us ways around it. Stefan Scheo and Martina Thiollet tell us that we need to redefine what a migrant is. Janine Dahinden, Janine, I can see you there, tells us to sublate the migrant within alternate ontologies, and Barak Kalir suggests that we need to bring in migrant perspectives. These are all really good moves, but they're conceptual and methodological moves, and concepts and methods will not change disciplinary ontology because of one fatal paradox. Disciplinary ontologies are impervious to critique. To take an analogy, in political science there have been decades of research demonstrating the problems with the concept of the state as a coherent actor. And yet, researchers continue to return to this same trope in their research. Like a punching bag, the harder you hit it, the stronger it returns. Similarly, we have put Wimmer and Glickschiller's appeal against methodological nationalism on every single summer school program. Anya Frank can shout until she is blue in the face that we need to humanize migrants and understand their essential fallibility and creativity. And still, the same figure of the migrant will appear in our research. This is not because we are bad people. It's not because we're stupid. It has to do with the fact that our institutions, whether we like it or not, reinforce this ontology. The argument in the paper is slightly more nuanced. In the written version, I take the time to show how and why we tend to invest our time and our money in the development of fields and subfields, and how these sunk costs make it very difficult to turn tear things down and rebuild. Our credibility, our hireability, our fundability, our reputation, all become attached to the acceptance of a shared object of study, the migrant. And institutions like UMISCO, which trade in credibility, reputation, and fame, help reinforce this incentive structure. So we are stuck in a loop of having to say that migration is one of the world's great problems, because it would be just all too easy to say that racism is one of the world's great problems and migration is its muse. But then, what would our purpose be as scholars? How would we justify our jobs? How would we make the case for that next research handbook to Routledge or for that consolidated grant to the ERC? As I argue in this paper, I'm proposing nothing less than the end of migration studies as an institutional project. This is a difficult proposition, in part because we like christenings and anniversaries way better than we like funerals. Many of you have been at a workshop inaugurating the birth of a field or a conference looking back at the legacy of another. We thrive off intellectual excitement and nostalgia, but still, someone needs to know when it's time to pack up and turn off the lights. So what's my way forward? Well, I'm not going to convince people who've been doing this for 10 or 20 years. They're all going to want to keep coming to UMISCO each year and continuing their conversations with close colleagues, and there's nothing wrong with that. I want to address the early career scholars amongst us who, possibly unbeknownst to them, have a lot of power to shape things, not because of some wide-eyed idealism, but in the very practical way of having a conference budget to spend and a decision to make on what institutions to help to build with that money. Here it's worth noting that migration studies has been intellectually decentering for decades. There are many fields of research that have been built adjacent to our own and which question this figure of the migrant. They shift our ontologies, whether it is border studies, mobility studies, transnational studies, law and society, critical race studies, ethnographies of the state, and decolonial research. My question to you is whether those fields deserve your small pot of money more than migration studies, and whether the forms of discipline you find there are more acceptable than what you find here.
More and more radical. Now we want, you want to test us.
This work, yes. Such a pressure. Well, I have to start with thank the organizers to invite me here, because, you know, I haven't performed in front of such an audience before, so I feel like my late debut or something like this, and it's a really nice feeling. I'm a political scientist, as Hélène introduced me, and I'm working in diaspora studies field. So from this perspective, I try to stick to the questions which Hélène sent us some time ago. And I have to confess that when I saw the idea of the panel and the topic, I was rather skeptical, because I'm an empirical researcher. I'm not a theorist. And from this perspective, the political science, the diaspora studies, and also more empirical research, I would like to touch at least some of the questions introduced by Hélène at the beginning. My second thought was that, well, diaspora studies, theoretical output, I think that it's really limited in this field. Of course, what I mean is that there is no, let's say, great ground theory which could explain such a great phenomenon as diaspora, but they are, of course, middle-range theories following the Robert Merton's typology. So diaspora is transnational community, or the long-distance nationalism. But my second thought was, why is it so difficult now to build theories in diaspora studies? I mean, whether we are able to develop theories explaining such a fast-changing, dynamic reality related to migration, to diaspora formation development. And my answer will be that, yes, we can do that, but it's really, really difficult. And I think that that's something what we really need now is this decentering of our thinking on migration processes, on diaspora processes. And the goal I have set for myself for today, or tonight, is to tell you briefly about some evidences which I see of decentering diaspora studies, and I would like to briefly present at least some of them. First is that what is really interesting process nowadays is just the reconfiguration of the concepts. We see it in migration studies, we see it in diaspora studies, and when we see the classical definition formed in mid-70s or 90s, I mean the concept of diaspora by historians, by political scientists like Gabriel Scheffer, William Safran, Robert Cohen, the American, the Jewish, and the British scholars, the historians and political scientists, which is, I think, quite important. And they built this concept around a set of key characteristics, key features, what diaspora is. So there is dispersion from homeland, collective memory of homeland, myth of return, strong ethnic group consciousness, shared historical trauma. They are based on very classical examples, very classical cases, like Jewish, Greek, Armenian diasporas. So of course, quite quickly, it was criticized as too essentialist, too homeland-oriented, too Eurocentric, focused on exile and trauma experiences, and of course, as ignoring, neglecting other non-Western perspectives, like Southern, Eastern perspectives, experiences related to colonial ties, war and conflicts, changing borders, economic, labor, free movement, or agency of diasporas. The last point, I would like to return to it afterwards. And in time, the very new, interesting attempts to look at diaspora phenomenon was visible, like diaspora as a process, diaspora as social movement, Martin Zuckerfeld, Roger Brubaker. So diaspora as an agent, as a subject, not as an object of state policy. And second field I would like to briefly introduce as a decentering trend, because I understand this decentering process in a really broad way, is visible in the disciplinary field. So what I mean is that historians could be described as the founding fathers of diaspora studies. History was for a very long time the leading discipline. Much later, the representatives of different disciplines joined the table, like political scientists or ethnographers or representatives of economics, international relations, anthropology, sociology, conflict and peace studies. So it's also quite important how, and I think that this similar trend was visible in migration studies too. And the third field of decentering processes, which I see in diaspora studies, is like, I could describe it as epistemic decentralization. What I mean is that the voices and frameworks from non-Western regions are more and more present in diaspora studies. So we see that the diasporas from Africa, Asia, Latin America, Central Eastern Europe are studied extensively. And what is very important, maybe trend is not a good word, but still something what is very visible in last, let's say, decade, is to study diasporas without nation state, which I think is very important because it's like the out-of-the-box approach, because in diaspora studies, this nation-state centrality was like the fundament of this field. And now the Roma, Kurdish, Palestinians, Rohingya diasporas are studied. It's a really interesting subject of research. Another field where I see these decentering processes are the new methods. The oral histories, art and media, everyday cultural practices, more participatory research methods are very visible. Digital sphere as a digital diasporas, digital sphere as a field of research, which are very useful to understand individual and this meso level of diaspora formation and development and internal dynamics in this group. I think that I still have like 2 minutes more, right? Exactly, 2 minutes, yes. Thank you. My last point, I just want to return to this piece of diaspora studies, which for me is a key one because I'm really involved in it. So treating diaspora as an agent, as transnational political actor. So it's no more like a passive receiver object of state policy, but as an entity, a subject influencing homeland politics, shaping foreign policy of host countries, lobbying power, conflict mediator, and electoral power of diaspora. I'm looking at Jean-Michel because I share a love with this topic with him. And everything what was covered by, let's say, long-distance nationalism. So to conclude in one sentence, my aim was just to sketch to you some fields where decentering processes are taking place in diaspora studies. And many of them are common with migration studies and are related not only to the non-Western case studies and perspectives, but also theories to concepts, disciplines, and methods. And I think that the decentering processes are just not even needed, they're required to develop our fields of research, like migration studies or diaspora studies, to move forward. And yeah, and I stop here. Thank you very much.
I was going to just first open a super brief and quick potential reaction from the panelists to their fellow panelists' intervention, but a very brief one before we open to an unfortunately limited number of questions before we break for cocktails. So is there a reaction to Peggy? Oh, you have a mic.
Yeah. Wow, this is great. I really appreciated everyone's contribution and you for convening this. So I'm not, my life's work right now is not about just decentering migration studies. So I really want to push us to think about going beyond that and thinking about knowledge production in general. And maybe that's part of the solution to decentering migration studies more fully. And I also want to insist on the fact that it's not just about content, but it's a moral project, an ontological project, an attitudinal, a professional ethos project. And that there should always be a positive way forward. So you can think about soft reform, which is kind of diversifying that we've been talking about, diversifying the people, diversifying the categories, the content, what we teach. You could think about hard reform, which is the institutions in place but deeply transformed, or you could think about beyond reform, where the institution is so beyond repair that you need to hospice it and then think of something new. So in a way, you guys are saying, you're saying beyond reform. So I want to know, in the spirit of what it should look like, what is an un-migration studies project in an institutional context that takes all of the things that you mentioned that constrain it? What does that look like? 50 seconds, no.
Oh, for me, no. It's for me. It's quite easy actually, because we go back to like I mentioned, the Stuart Hall and Edward Said and how they have done their work. There's a very clear model for us to follow. The reason is that that type of that way of deploying our intellectual labor has been replaced by another mode of being and another mode of working, and that is a problem. So that sounds like something, oh, you know, if you are already formulated in this way, it's quite difficult to change. I don't believe so. And I think if young people are told and to read that kind of organic intellectual work, and naturally I think that is more attractive than this kind of doing just technical paper publishing. Then the question for you, Darshan, is about the critique my critique of your critique is the question of externality. It is external critique in two senses. Number one, it is you stay away from all this work, and so therefore you have a total critique. You know, it's a totalizing. You say it's ontological. The entire thing is on the wrong place. So therefore, the best solution is to end it. And another sense is that external critique, number one is the totalizing. The number two is probably, well, I'm not very clear about my formula, is that you don't see how things could be changed from within. Because this is, you know, maybe it's a bad way to organize our work around the migration studies, but there are so many people here. Young people come with their genuine enthusiasm, with their genuine concerns. They spend the time and energy invested there. So that is lots of accumulation of human labor. And if it's old Marxist, they would say the change must be coming from this existing accumulated human effort. So it is alienated worker suddenly realize their relation with power and etc. They reorganize themselves. So this is internal critique about the processes. So therefore you can guide them to a new direction, a new way to use their energy. So the external one be totalizing and then having declaration of the end of everything. So that leave us hanging.
Quick, yep. Look, I'm not kidding myself here, and I'm not gonna end migration studies in one fell swoop. Jean-Michel and his colleagues are doing far too good a job, right? And I would say, I think it's also in the paper, I think there are very good examples, right, of fields that have managed to move beyond some of these ontological strictures. And there are disciplines that have changed their entire ontology. Look at anthropology in the sort of 70s and 80s, right? This can happen. It also takes a lot of work, right? And so what I'm looking at here and why I'm proposing sort of a more 1,000 lifeboats model of rescue is that I think that the pathways are actually already there and they have been constituted, and that's how you battle and struggle with institutional strictures. What I'm curious to know is and if I can turn it back to Peggy, I don't know, can I do that? So is how, I agree with everything that you're saying, right? And I think you provide an ethical pathway to scholarship that is admirable and should be a model for everyone. And I'm very curious to know is how do you do that in a way that allows the colleagues that, and I assume there's academics involved in a lot of them, to resist some of the institutional incentives and the power structures that force them to conceive of scholarship in an entirely different way.
Answers necessarily, but then we open to questions for our colleagues. Another set of questions, and then we'll have more.
Yes, again, I feel that I will be more to the ground person in our group here. But I just ask myself what limits us. What Peggy said about this embeddedness in infrastructures and in institutions, I think that also that we are all embedded in the discipline which we were educated. And it's really difficult to go beyond. When I'm presenting political science, so that's my limitation, focusing on the, let's say, this narrow perspective, and I feel that I'm rooted in political science, so my main point of reference will be state, will be power relations, will be role of institutions, state and politics, and it's really difficult to go beyond this. So in my case, I mean, in my experience is that if you're working with people representing other disciplines, and I'm really appreciate that I'm working in this kind of environment in the Center of Migration Research, which gives me this broaden this possibility to broaden my perspective and to include the achievements of other disciplines. Otherwise, I feel that I'm failing. I mean, it's impossible to even touch this process migration or diaspora without interdisciplinary approach. And my goal is to go beyond these discipline limitations. However, of course, probably it's impossible because we have to change the whole model of education we have, beginning from the BA and MA studies. And another limitation is, and I will be like really deep touching the ground here, is that we have a kind of, that these institutions and funding schemes also limits us very strongly. And we have a priori imposed sometimes that if we are lucky, we can choose our research topic, but very often we have a priori imposed what, where, and how, and for how long we have to plan our research, and we are dictated sometimes by external factors. We are kind of dependent on short-term grants, projects, or thinking about application for another project before the previous one has been finished, and that's something what's truly speaking just killing us softly. But I don't want to open this Pandora box about the condition of present academia but it's a serious limitation, and we all are really, we have to face it.
Thank you very much to you all. Thank you.